I took a leap of faith. It was like the best decision I made in my life.
Meet Monica Millares, a fintech product leader with 20 years of experience across Mexico, London, and Southeast Asia. She scaled digital banking solutions from zero to millions of users, bringing deep expertise in making banking work better for everyone.
When I left my corporate job in Barclays and my colleagues asked me, "So where are you going?" I said, "To a new bank. Doesn't even have a name yet. It's an idea." I've been very lucky to see how we've gone from a startup to an established player to now a scale-up. Hey, before we dive in, can I please ask you for a big favor? If you are enjoying these conversations and getting value from the insights our fintech leaders share, please hit the subscribe button below. This is the easiest way to support the show, and it could mean a lot. My commitment to you is every single week, I'll continue to bring more founders and product leaders that share with us the strategies that are working today to drive innovation and fintech growth. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. One of the most frequently asked questions I get all the time is, Moni, how did you get into fintech? How did you get into product? And how did you get to Malaysia as a Mexican? So what I want to do today is to share my story because probably I haven't shared it anywhere. I will not share my whole story. I will do a dedicated episode for that. But basically, I want to share the answers on how I got into fintech, product, Malaysia, and the key lessons, right? And if you ask me when I was 15 years old or when I was in high school, even in uni, did you ever see yourself like building a bank from scratch? Or like living in Asia, like for years, leading this product team? Obviously not. I never thought about it. It was never instilled in me as a young Mexican woman that I could be an entrepreneur or that I could be a tech entrepreneur. That wasn't the thing back then, right? Or that I could be living abroad and learning all these cultures. That was not instilled in me. What was instilled in me was this idea that I could do anything I wanted to if I put the effort and the work and the commitment to do it. But I never dreamed about having this life, and I am absolutely blessed. So with big blessings come big responsibilities, which is sharing the recipe for success, such that all of us can replicate all that. So let's get into question number one. How did I get into fintech? That is a little bit of luck, serendipity, and I say the courage to say yes. I was prepared. The opportunity came up and I had the courage to say yes. So the how that happened is back in 2014 or so, I was in the UK and the Bank of England was trying to disrupt the market, meaning we had gone through the 2008 crisis. And one of the outcomes was, hey, we need a little bit more competition. Therefore, they were open to having more players in the market. And that is super important. So regulatory wise, we were ready. They were open. Then second, the Airbnb revolution, the Spotify revolution had happened just a few years before. So that's when we had pioneers, entrepreneurs, visionaries saying, hey, if these guys disrupted the music industry, if these guys disrupted the hotel industry and everybody said that it couldn't be done, why don't we disrupt the banking industry? And I was super lucky because I met one of those entrepreneurs, Ricky. When I met him, the whole premise behind the bank, it was, hey, one, banking is broken. Two, there's no transparency. Three, and more importantly, money is the number one or number two source of stress for people worldwide. This is 10 years ago. And this is still true as of today. Money stress is an issue in everybody's life. We know divorces, we know health issues, and many times they are originated because of stress around money. So it is a big pain point that people have. So if we recap, basically, when I met Ricky Knox and he was starting the bank, I was in this inflection point that I was like, hey, do I study an MBA? Do I look for a new job? Or this opportunity came up and I was like, oh, why don't I just leave corporate and go and join this guy that I don't even know and go and build a bank from scratch? Why not? And that's what I did, right? So basically, I took a leap of faith when I left my corporate job in Barclays and my colleagues asked me, so where are you going? I said, to a new bank. And they're like, Monica, are you sure? To a new bank? What's the name? And I'm like, oh, it doesn't even have a name yet. It's an idea. And they were like, are you sure this is not a scam? I was like, well, they don't put this in guys. And obviously it was not a scam. It was like the best decision I made in my life. But it was a very bold move because back then, fintech was not a thing. This idea of going and building a bank from scratch, this idea of building a tech startup, but like we used to see it in Silicon Valley, e.g. Netflix, not in real life in London. It wasn't part of the culture. So it was a big risk that I took and it paid off. So that's how I got into fintech. So one of my first lessons in my first 2 years in fintech, that mainly they were in Tandem Bank, that I still use as of today is the modus operandi is very different. But on my week 1, I remember I told my boss back then, Nick, and I was like, hey, so I'm the new girl. So what's my job? What do I need to do? And he was like, oh, you are the credit card expert. So you need to build credit cards. And I was like, wait, but I'm not the expert. I'm like, I come from a company that has thousands of people just running a credit card. There's no such a thing as a credit cards expert. There's like a big company with thousands of people. And he said back to me, yeah, that's in the big banks. But here, you are the one that knows the most about credit cards, and that makes you the expert. And I was like, what? I learned a ton of lessons from that conversation. Number 1 was he was right. In the context, everything is contextual. In the context of a startup, either you learn the skill or the person who has at least some degree of understanding that thing that you're about to do, that person is the expert. So you have to trust yourself. You have to trust enough to figure it out. So that's a huge lesson. You will figure it out. You just have to trust yourself. Lesson number 2 that I learned very fast, it was, hey, in Barclays, we had thousands of people running credit cards. And you've had a marketing team, a legal team, this, the other. In a startup, you don't. So you don't have a big team doing all these things for you. You just do it. And then that comes with lesson number 3, which is usually what happened all the time was like, we need to do this in 2 days or in a day or something. And most people could be like, no, but in the bank, that could take like a month and we would have like a team of 10 people. Here we're like 2 people and we need to do it in 2 days. That is impossible. So that's where I learned my startup modus of operandus. It was like genuinely thrown into the ocean, the startup ocean, and we had to learn and swim, otherwise you sink. But as of today, you can ask my colleagues now, as of today, I'm like, hey, we need to do this in 2 days' time. And we're like, what? We still do it. And the principle is time boxing. I'm sure you've heard that before. If not, I'll simplify it for you. That's one of the biggest lessons in my 10 years in startups. If usually you say, hey, this takes 1 month, 2 weeks, 1 week, whatever it says, but you've only got 2 hours to do it, 2 days to do it. You're like, you do whatever you have to do and you do it in those 2 days to the best of your abilities. You time box the activity, whether you have the actual constraint because your boss needs that thing by that day, or the vendor needs you to hit that deadline, or because you just have a ton going on and you don't have enough time and this can take forever. And you're like, no, I'll just do it in 2 hours. Monica, but that's not enough. Yes, it is enough to distill the essence and just do it in 2 hours. That is a modus of operandus that probably you don't learn by reading nor listening to podcasts. You learn by doing, and by doing it time after time. And that lesson is priceless. So if you work in a startup, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, but you want to get into a startup, start practicing that with yourself, like with your personal projects, with fitness and at work, such that as you start putting yourself forward to these roles in the startup world, you are more startup ready. So the question number 2 that I get all the time is, Monica, how did you get into product? Okay, so that one is a mix of I was lucky and I asked for it. So number 1, I was lucky because my very first job was in the product team. This is many years ago. My first job was in a development bank in Mexico. I remember I was still studying my degree. I studied engineering. And then I started working in a development bank in the product team. And my boss, she was an economist. Her boss was an economist. And we were in the product development team. And we had to talk a lot with tech. And I got the impression that they didn't like working with tech a ton. They were like, hey, Monica, you're the engineer, you go and work with tech. So I started working with tech and I started working with operations. And I remember Javier Faz was like the CTO in Bansefi, my very first job. Amazing. I learned so much from him and he inspired me to then go and study tech and basically do my master's in IT management. But anyways, I was lucky. That was my very first job. And I was lucky that my bosses at the time were like, you go and do it. Go and liaise with tech, go and liaise with operations. I remember one of my first memories were like, I had to design the remittances flow for a product for immigrants in the US sending money back to Mexico. And I remember having a piece of paper, like a white piece of paper, and drawing my stick man and doing what now we call a user flow. So that was my very first job in product. However, I've had different transitions. That job in product, as my first job 20 years ago, the foundations were still there. We started with a customer journey. We didn't call it a customer journey then, but it's what it was. It was a customer journey. And that gave me probably that customer obsession since the very beginning, because we were a development bank. We were serving the base of the pyramid. And we didn't use the word we're purpose driven, but the whole organization was purpose driven because we were serving people. We were helping them get ahead. We were helping them send money back home. It was genuinely, I loved that place because of the people and the heart that they had to help the people who needed the most. So my second transition was I studied my master's in the UK, then I joined Visa. And it was not a product team. It was global sales account kind of role, but that allowed me to really understand how the schemes, how payments work from the inside, like the analytics, the metrics, the whole thing of how payments work. And eventually we were made redundant. So I ended up in Barclays. And then in Barclays, I did not join the product team. I joined the existing customer management team, but I learned how a bank worked. I learned like when you send a mail to the post to somebody else's house, I learned everything that we had to do around that campaign. And it was like limits management, reactivation, blah, blah, blah. And eventually I was like, I don't want to do this. I want to go back to product. That's because that was what I did in my first job. And I want to go back to it. I was lucky because exactly my manager supported the move. So I moved to help manage the small business team in credit cards in Barclays. So I was part of the team, and that's when I was exposed to working with design thinking agencies, creative agencies, speaking to customers, designing the interviews, all the regulatory. But that was when we didn't have apps. It was the beginning of Agile because there was a digital transformation team who they were starting to rebuild the digital interface as such. And then basically, when I transitioned from Barclays to Startup World to Tandem, that was one of the biggest transitions because then it was leaving corporate and going into startup. And that is when I learned real product at the core because it was straight into digital product. So I had strong from of the core of product that it was like, hey, we're building something for the customer. That I picked it up in my very first job. I learned how the payments industry works. I learned how a bank works. I had learned product within a bank. And now I've had the amazing opportunity to go and replicate that in a startup with amazing founders. And what I had not done then was working agile, building an app. I had only worked the corporate way. So when I jumped into the startup world, I learned product the way that we do it in startups. And that was amazing. And then the next chapter in my product journey was like when I left Tandem, I moved from being an individual contributor in a product team with amazing leaders, both of the product team and the company, to then leaving the UK, moving across the world to a new country where I didn't know anyone, I didn't know the founders. And basically, it was a little bit of a risky move, very bold move, but I did it anyways. And then I went from being an individual contributor in an established fintech challenger bank to leading the product team in a startup in Asia, in Southeast Asia. So basically, I joined BigPay before we got started. I was the first, both in Tandem, I was the first hire in the product team. In BigPay, I was the first hire in the product team. I was the head of product of one. And then the big difference that I saw, I went from being an individual contributor to being a product leader and helping to build the startup, right? And when the guys hired me, they were like, we want you because you've gone through the process, you've seen how to do it, you've made the mistakes, you've learned a lot, we want you here. And that's how I ended up here in BigPay. It was one of the best decisions of my life. It's been like over 7 years. So I'm not going to bore you with the 7 years, but I've been very lucky to see how we've gone from a startup very early stage to an established player to now a scale-up. So I've been able to see the evolution of product and product management and practices and ways of working as we scale, which is an amazing journey. So that answers the question, how did I get into product and what has been my trajectory within product? Probably what I haven't answered is which products have I worked on? So I've worked on a ton of products in financial services. So my first product was remittances back in Mexico, a service between Mexicans in the US to Mexico. Now that's very brother. Then I did a bill payment system back then. I remember I even presented that system in front of 500 people in a conference. That's where I learned the talking. And then at Barclays, we did small business credit cards. I didn't build it, I just managed it. In Tandem, I built credit cards from scratch. That's one of the products that I'm the proudest of. And I'm the most grateful to my managers back then because they gave me the opportunity. They trusted in me to go and just build it. So it was just me and my counterpart, David, in operations. We built the whole thing, which was absolutely amazing. And then after building credit cards from scratch, then given that I was the first one in the team, before we hired people, I could start working on savings, I could start working on lending, and then pass it over to some people. So when I moved to Big Pay, and it was similar, I launched the app and the card, but then eventually it's rebuild analytics, rebuild app redesign, launch the remittances business, start lending, and then pass it over. So I've touched almost every single product in Big Pay app in a way or another. Either I started and launched it, or I started and then transitioned to someone, or basically now the team has started it and it's my pleasure for them to build it and go through the lessons. So it's been an amazing journey. I guess like the biggest mistake that I've done building product has been not being strong enough. Let me rephrase what I mean. Sometimes we have ideas. Sometimes we have point of views, and the leaders in the business, they have stronger views. So I think if I were to go back in time, I wish I could have learned how to fight for my ideas in a better way earlier than I learned how to do it. That's a big lesson. So if you are still starting your career or getting into product, I guess one of the skills that you can develop that will serve you a ton in your career is learn how to argue with a very senior person, not in terms of having arguments, but defend your ideas and be able to fight for them based on data, based on strategy, like based on different things. Yeah, that's what I would change. But let me go a little bit deeper. So the thrill, everything that I've been talking about, I can tell you about the narrative of how I got there. But the feelings, both of working in fintech and working in product, they are just like amazing. One of my favorite feelings is what I call brain expansion moment. And I'm going through one of them right now. So brain expansion moment is a moment that you're like, hey, we need to do this. And you go, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. Or, oh my God, it's the first time I do this. And then your brain goes in overdrive mode and you're like, ah, and you're thinking, but you'll have to figure it out. And eventually you're like, I don't know this, but I'll figure it out. And you do. And that's the brain expansion moment. That's when you learn and you grow a ton. And that feeling is, it's just amazing. The other feeling that is amazing is when you launch the product that you've been working on so hard and you have all the sign-ups and the governance and the testing and this, the other, and finally you put it out in the market and you're like, and it sinks and you're like, oh, that hurts. Or with us, like one time we launched this product and then it was so successful. Then we had so many issues in the call center because we also had issues, but it was like successful. So it was like, oh my God, that was so stressful. So the roller coaster of launching a product, it's exciting. Like at the moment it's stressful, but it's very exciting. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough in the blogs and the podcasts and like the books and all that. We talk about frameworks, but it's important that we communicate to people like the emotions that come with working in a startup and the emotions that come with building a product. And I guess the third very important emotion is you get connected. Like I value connection a lot. And you get connected with your customers. When you hear their stories or when you're interviewing them, you start caring about your customers, and that you only do when you interact with them. But it is a beautiful feeling because then it gives meaning to your job, because then you know that whatever you're doing, there's a human on the other side that's actually using your product. And that is beautiful. I think there's two moments that have made a difference in my life as a professional. The first one was in the UK when we were in the startup. We were interviewing customers, but instead of going like to set up interviewing center where you are behind the mirror and then you're watching how somebody interviews them. That's how we used to do it at Barclays. We went to people's homes. So basically, we went to the office, we prepared, and we went to people's homes, like actually inside of their homes. And then we interviewed them at home. And that was a very unique experience. And you're like, oh my God, this is how people live. That really touched me. And in Malaysia, one of the customer moments that has been lovely and really touched me was when one of our customers wrote to us or put on social media and said, hey, thank you, Victory, because of you and because of this campaign. Basically, we work with the government to distribute cell phones. And one of my dreams has always been to basically try Krispy Kreme donuts. And now because of this weekend, I bought Krispy Kreme donuts. And thank you, because now my dream is basically a reality. And that was just like so heart touching, because quite likely for you and I, it's just a donut. But for our customers, it's not just a donut. It is a dream, and it's emotional. So that's one of the things that I love about products. I feel like I've been talking for a very long time. So let's wrap up. I've told you my story. I've told you my emotion throughout my story. I've told you some lessons. Now, if you are a fintech leader, if you work in product and you would like to learn more, e.g., you're now stuck in I don't know if my roadmap is enough to survive. I don't know how to attract customers. I don't know how to change product operating model because we're growing too fast. If you want to chat, happy to help. Ping me and let's put it in the calendar. I'm open to sharing my ideas. Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen, and see you next week. Ciao.